Hey guys, this is your host Eric. Today we are going to watch horror genre movie called Daybreakers. Spoilers ahead, turn on your subtitle, I greatly appreciate your support. Enjoy the video. In the year 2019, a young girl writes a letter in which she says she will never change or grow up, which is too much for her. She goes outside to watch the dawn, and when she looks up, we can see that her eyes are yellow. She doesn't die. When the sun comes up, her whole body starts to burn. Then it's shown to us, because of a disease spread by an infected bat in 2009. The world is empty during the day. Most people have turned into vampires. The number of people is up, and scientists are looking for alternatives to blood to feed the vampires, while a small group of them fight for human rights because they were being hunted. When night comes, everything comes back to life. We see vampires doing normal things like going to work or hanging out with friends. There is even a homeless vampire who begs for blood and threatens a random person. For that, the police gave him an electric shock and took away his car. And then our main character, Edward Dalton, takes the subway to get to work. He works for Bromley Marks as a hematologist, a company that makes medicines and is a major blood supplier. Before going to his lab, Edward walks by the rooms with the machines that farm humans, which he hates, after going through security at the building's entrance. He is still trying to find a blood substitute, but his most recent attempt failed as well. After that, he meets with Charles Bromley, his boss, Christopher Caruso, his lab partner, a commissioner, and an army. The commissioner tells them how the experiment with the death row inmate turned out. He was chosen for a study on what happens when you don't get enough blood. The frontal lobe of the brain died because there wasn't enough blood. His ears getting bigger was the first sign. He quickly turned into a creature with no reason or feelings, like a nose for a TU. People call these creatures subsidiaries, and they are becoming a problem on the streets. There are only 5% of people left, and if they don't find a replacement soon, they will all become subsidiaries. Bromley jumps in and takes Edward to his office for a private meeting. Edward doesn't notice the blood in the coffee. He's done. Bromley tells him his story while he listens. He used to have cancer, but he was cured by becoming a vampire. His daughter didn't want to go back, so she ran away. He knows Edward pits people just like he does. So, in order to save the human, they need to start testing as soon as possible. Edward talks to Christopher about this in his lab. After some hesitation, Christopher points out that the replacement is working on a monkey, so it's time to stop testing on animals. A few minutes later, the test starts, and Bromley and some officers watch through a window. Edward slowly puts a substitute into the body of a private, who at first feels fine, but then throws up and starts talking. As nasty blisters start to show up all over his body, the researchers move quickly to hold him down and give him a mo, which stops him from shaking and gets rid of the blisters. But in just a second, his whole body blows up. Edward leaves the office late that night and drives home. He is in his car watching the news, which is about riots caused by blood rationing plans. When he scratches his ear and notices something is wrong, he opens his camera mirror to check. The tips of his ears are getting longer. Because of this, he doesn't see the car coming from the other direction. At the last second, he gets out of the way and stops his car, but the other car hits a fence. When Edward goes out to help, an arrow hits him in the arm. People are getting out of the other car, and they're people. Audrey Bennett has a crossbow to fight vampires with. Suddenly, they hear police cars coming up behind them. So Edward says he just wants to help and asks the humans to get in his car, which they do. After hesitating for a while, Edward turns on the car's daytime driving mode, which closes all the windows. Then, when the police show up, Black pulls the arrow out of his arm and lies to them about where the people ran. Audrey finds Edward's ID badge and finds out what he does for a living. After the police leave, the humans get out of the car, and Audrey wishes Edward a happy birthday. Moments later, they all leave, and Edward gets home just as a community announcement tells everyone that sunrise is coming. When he gets home, he eats dinner and then starts to take care of his plants. Frankie Dalton, whom he hasn't seen in months because he joined surprises him with a visit. Frankie says that there isn't a birthday party, and Edward says that he's already turned 35 10 times. But Frankie doesn't care. He thinks they should have a party, so he brought a pricey bottle of pure human blood. He pours 2 glasses and makes fun of his brother for wanting to drink pig blood, but Edward refuses. This evening, Frankie brings up an old fight. Edward doesn't drink human blood, but he still works for a company that farms people because he thinks it's the only way to find a replacement. But he also thinks Frankie is bad because he hunts people for the army. Edward grabs the blood bottle out of the blue and starts pouring it down the drain. Frankie grabs it from him and smashes it against the wall before trying to leave. He doesn't, but a subject gets in his way, so the creature goes into the kitchen and starts licking the blood off the walls. It then moves onto the glass on the table. Frankie grabs a knife from the holder, which scares the subber and makes it push him against the wall. He hits his head on a glass table and loses consciousness for a few seconds. The subter moves toward Edward next, and he holds it down with a stool while calling his brother's name. Frankie wakes up and gets up to get the knife. The brothers try to attack the subter, but it jumps away and hangs from the ceiling. This lets Frankie cut it a few times before cutting off its head. Moments later, the police show up to take over the case, and they say something about how strange it is that the suspects are in the suburbs. Now, one of the officers finds a ring on the creature, which tells Edward that it was a gardener from the neighborhood. She also finds that she hurts herself. Feeding on themselves makes the change happen faster. The next morning, Edward gets a security alert that wakes him up. When he turns on the lights to check, he sees that Audrey is pointing a crossbow at him. She tells him that they have been looking for vampires they can trust and that they need his help to find another way besides a substitute. She also gives him a map on a piece of paper. Edward is suddenly distracted by a noise, so he turns around and lets Audrey leave quietly. When he checks out the noise, Frankie asks Edward what it was. Edward says, "Don't worry about it." Later at night, the news shows that investors are pulling out of Bramley's human supply. Edward goes to work and talks to his boss to get a promise that the substitute will take the place of people. Bramley tells him that most people will be happy with the decision, but there will always be a small group that wants the real thing. Edward tells him that would include Bramley's daughter, and then he goes back to his lab to look at the map some more. Edward doesn't go back home when morning comes. He covers his car's lights and follows a map to the country, where Audrey is already waiting for him. She tells him to walk up to a big tree. He parks under the tree's shade and leaves after putting on his hat and sunglasses. Make sure you never step into the light. He goes up to Lionel Elvis Cormack, an old man. He used to be a vampire, but now he's a normal person. Edward wants to know how, but they have to stop when Frankie pulls a gun on Audrey and brings her closer. Edward wants to stop him, but Frankie won't listen. Meanwhile, the army is on its way to help. Frankie is pushed out into the light by Audrey, who then joins the men. They take Edward's car because Lionel's car has already been shot up by the soldiers. As they drive away, they are chased and shot at, making holes in their cars, protecting the dark. At first, Audrey is able to cover them with her hands, but then there are too many of them and the camera breaks, so Edward can't see what's coming. When they get to a dark bridge, Lionel takes the wheel so he can see the road through a hole and Edward can hide from the light. Lionel drives as fast as he can to cross it safely, but the military truck is too heavy and the bridge breaks under it. This causes the truck to explode. The rest of the backup is stuck behind and can't catch up. When it gets dark, they park by a river, and Lionel tells his story to Edward. He used to work on making cars daylight, and his shop was one of the first in town to do that. Driving is great because there are no other people around, but it can also be dangerous for the driver. Lionel had this happen to him. He didn't feel good because he hadn't eaten, so he drove into the river fence by accident. He was thrown out of the car when it crashed, and he caught fire before he fell into the river. He was a person when he got out of the river. Lionel and Audrey want Edward to make these situations happen again in a safe way. Bromley was back at work and was looking at pictures of his daughter. When Frankie comes to see him, Bromley praises him for telling what happened and tells him that Edward won't be charged if he comes back right away. Frankie does whatever Bromley tells him to do. The humans and Edward are now back in his car and driving to their safe house. Edward can't take his eyes off of Audrey. When she sees this in his pointy ears, she cuts her hand and pours some of her blood into a cup for him to drink. At first, he says no, but Audrey needs to know that the other humans will be safe around him, so he takes the cup and drinks it. A few hours later, they may get to an old vineyard where Edward meets other humans, including Jarvis, who is leading a group of rescuers. After entering the house, Edward also meets Senator Wes Turner, a vampire politician who wants to protect human rights and find a cure. After a quick cut to Bromley, where we see one of his machines with no people in it and one of his researchers taking out a body, we see a man at a subway station coffee stand complaining that his coffee doesn't have enough blood. The worker tells him that she can only serve 5% more than that, but the man won't listen to the word no. He steals the blood bag, and when he breaks it, he splashes everyone around him, making them go crazy. People start a riot and attack the coffee stand to steal more blood, which makes the police come and shock them until they stop. The next morning, at the vineyard, Edward takes some blood from Lionel to run some tests, while he asks us some questions about how we felt the day we became human. Edward thinks that the only way to treat the blood might be to go inside, keeping the daylight burn in check. When he leaves the lab to take a break a few hours later, most people move away from him. Audrey tells him that even though they are afraid of him, they still believe he can help. Edward says he didn't want to change, but Frankie betrayed him and made him change anyway. Then Edward notices the fermentation tanks. After Audrey confirms that they are airtight, they go to look at them from the tanks have air extractors that could put out a fire. Edward wants to use them for the experiment, so they start making the changes that are needed. Later, in the middle of the night, we see Jarvis's group on the road, driving Allison, Bromley's daughter, and other rescued people to the vineyard. When they get a flat tire from a shot, they have to stop. They get out of the house with their weapons ready, but the army is already all around them. And after a short exchange of gunfire, everyone on Earth is knocked out. Allison gets in touch with the vineyard before she, too, passes out. So, when Frankie takes the walkie-talkie from her, they use it to track the call and find where the vineyard is. At the vineyard, all the humans are getting ready to follow Tuner to a safe house. They are gathering their things and getting into their cars. But Edward doesn't want to go because he won't be able to do the experiment again. So Lionel and Audrey decide to stay behind and help out at the Bramleys as well. Allison wakes up in her dad's office, and as he comes to see her, she grabs a knife. Allison begs for her friends' lives. But Bromley tells her he's glad to see her but can't help her friends as he hugs her and Mitzi. Allison pushes him away and runs to the door, but a soldier knocks her out just as Bromley figures out that his daughter stabbed him. The experiment can begin when morning comes to the vineyard. Audrey will watch the monitors, and Lionel will stay in the tank with Edward, who is wearing a wet blanket and has a heart monitor attached to his chest. The steps are easy. They cut a hole in the tank so the sun can burn the fuel. The fire is then put out with the air extractor. The first 2 times they try, it doesn't work, but they let Edward burn long enough for the 3rd time, which does. Edward gets back to being human. When the army comes to raid the place, their happiness ends, but they don't get caught because they hide in a wine barrel. We go back to the company when Frankie goes to see Bromley in the hospital while he is getting care for his wound. Bromley asks Frankie to help him with something, so Frankie leaves the room to check on Allison. She still doesn't want to be turned, but Frankie bites her anyway. Back in the vineyard, after making sure it's safe, the 3 of them leave their hiding place. Edward goes outside and is amazed that the sun doesn't burn him, while Lionel gets his old car out of the garage. In the company, Bramley notices that all of his machines are now empty. He goes to check on his daughter, who isn't drinking her blood rations, and finds that she's biting herself, which will cause her to change. Before she is taken, she fights with her dad and blames him for everything. After the military declares martial law so that they can fight the subsidiaries on the streets, we cut to Edward, Audrey, and Lionel arriving at Tuner's cabin, only to find that everyone else had died. Audrey is starting to lose hope, but Edward says he knows someone who can help. After a quick cut to Christopher getting out of the lab, we see the military dragging theirs out into the sunlight to be killed. Allison is one of them, and Frankie changes his mind about his position after seeing her die. When Christopher goes back to his house, the 3 of them are already there waiting for him. Edward tells him that he has a better cure than the substitute and needs his help to do the experiment again. The phone rings in the middle of their talk, so Christopher leaves the room to answer it. When he doesn't come back quickly enough, they start to worry. So Audrey goes to find him while Edward and Lionel check his code. Christopher's cell phone was on a call the whole time, so everyone at the company now knows where they are. When the army shows up all of a sudden, Audrey is knocked out and taken prisoner. But Lionel and Edward got away by using the subwalk tunnels. They decided to hide in an old, empty garage, where a subber attacked them. Frankie comes along and shoots the monster before he realizes that his brother has turned into a person, which makes him confess. He changed him only because he didn't want to see him die. He says he did something wrong and now wants to help. But as Lionel gets closer, he gets too thirsty and jumps on the person to bite him. Edward catches him and shoves him away. Lionel is about to shoot his brother, but when he sees, he stops himself. So, a few minutes later, we see Edward walk into the company building on his own, which sets off the alarms because he is still human. He is caught by security and taken to Braun's office, where Audrey is bleeding on a chair and Braun is drinking her blood. Edward tells him he is sorry for everything and wants to be a vampire again. He hurt Audrey by betraying her. Bromley shows him that they finally found a replacement, so he doesn't need Edward anymore, and he calls him a coward. Edward says that Bromley is also a coward because he couldn't turn his own daughter. Furious, Bromley bites Edward, but it doesn't bother Edward at all. In fact, this was always his plan. Bromley begins to change into a person, and as Edward thinks about how Frankie also became a vampire, he tells him that the cure is to drink treated vampire blood. Bromley presses an alarm to call for security, and we cut to a bunch of army trucks pulling into the parking lot. When the soldiers get out of their cars and walk toward the elevator, the doors open and Bromley is tied to a chair. This makes the vampires go crazy and feed on him. Now that Edward has found weapons around the building, he and Aubrey go downstairs and are about to leave. When more soldiers show up to stop them, the glass doors suddenly break. When Frankie drives Lionel's car into the building, he hits all the soldiers to save his brother. However, the back of the building comes right away, and now they're surrounded. Frankie tells Edward to leave before he kills himself, which gives all the soldiers a chance to jump on him. Edward can't be sad about his father's death because a security guard has taken Audrey and he has to save her. He follows them to a security room where, after some fighting, Edward kills 2 vampire guards and Audrey kills the third with his help. Then, they watch on the security cameras as the soldiers who fed on Frankie turned human and attacked them, along with the other vampire soldiers. When Edward and Audrey get back to the lobby after the feeding massacre, only a few human soldiers are still alive. Christopher shows up, shoots 2 soldiers, and then says that there can't be a cure. He is going to shoot them as well. Lionel, who has come to help, shot the arrow that hit him in the chest and killed him. While Edward looks at the body of his brother, Audrey gives him a hug, and the light from the rising sun crept inside slowly. At the end of the movie, the 3 characters leave in Lionel's car, while Edward tells us that they have found the cure and can turn everyone back to normal. It's still possible. We really appreciate you watching. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell because it is really important for us. Thank you.